Hey parents, Carmine here with your video review of Bioshock Infinite. The Bioshock series has consistently told amazing stories and included some pretty intense superpower-based combat. Bioshock Infinite continues along that line with a crazy, twist-filled story involving the flying city of Columbia. The main character is tasked with kidnapping the daughter of the leader of Columbia and must fight through the police force of the city in order to do so.
Into our flock. Show 'em what we got.
Violence in Bioshock Infinite is going to vary. The first few chapters of the game are going to be extremely violent, but aren't really representative of the violence in the entire game. Still, the first major depiction of violence is very graphic and sets the tone for most of the next two chapters.
Stop him!
In a slightly later chapter, the player is introduced to a power called Murder of Crows. This introduction involves him watching as a man is torn to shred by a pack of angry crows. However, this isn't representative of how the power works when the player uses it. When the player uses Murder of Crows, the crows will go and attack the enemies, but leave them relatively undamaged. Devil's Kiss, a different power, is the most violent power available to the player. It allows the player to throw bombs which explode into fire and can ignite nearby enemies. While this was one of the powers I used most often, it was still much more common for me to kill my enemies by using firearms than by using powers. Violence with the game's numerous firearms is pretty predictable until headshots are involved. The player will shoot enemies which will result in a short spurt of blood. Headshots will usually just cause an extra musical sound to play. However, if the player gets a headshot with a more powerful weapon like a shotgun or sniper rifle, the enemy's head will completely disappear. For players who are accurate with snipers, this could become pretty common. Gore is also present in the game when the player uses melee executions. Normal melee hits will create a metallic thud, but are otherwise surprisingly mild. But if a player executes the enemy, more violent events will occur. The least violent of these will involve the player using the hook blade to snap his enemy's neck. The most violent of these involves the player using the hook blade to decapitate his enemy with the corresponding shower of blood. Both of these events and a few others are equally likely to occur when the player successfully performs an execution. But melee attacks decrease dramatically after the first few chapters. Enemies gain access to better weapons and armor, which encourages the player to attack from a distance with firearms and powers. The use of powers will also usually be limited, since the player will usually be forced to conserve salts for larger, more difficult battles. Substances will usually come in two forms. The most graphic form will be the powers that the player can obtain through drinking fluids in intricately designed bottles. Obtaining a power gives a short cutscene that demonstrates the player getting the ability. Some of these are more potentially horrific than others, but they only happen once per power. Consuming food, alcohol, salts, and in rare cases, cigarettes, is much more mild. The player automatically picks up and consumes the item without any animation. If the player consumes certain types of alcohol, he can become drunk for a very brief moment. Drunkenness consists of a very fuzzy screen, but doesn't last long at all. But what is odd is that the player can consume multiple bottles of wine with no effect, but a single bottle of an unmarked alcohol will instantly get the player drunk. But consuming alcohol and tobacco had mixed results, and because of this, I never used them in my playthrough. The content depicted here shows the violence and substance use, which made up a significant portion of the mature content within this game. However, the depictions of racism present in the first few chapters were also a major factor. As a result of the content shown here and more, which is covered in detail in the written review, we gave this game a recommended age of 18 years old. For the full written review, including the extra categories, log on to SideStoryGames.com.